Welcome back to Specimen the Sociologist. This is your host, Jessamine Reichman. Now, as you may know, my name rhymes with specimen, but with a J, and I am a budding sociologist who is on one simple mission. That is, to figure out the science behind our social lives and how it can be used to stabilize our social interactions. So, without further ado, let's dive into today's episode, the Sociology of SNAP. Now, to my international listeners, SNAP stands for Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which is the United States' largest anti hunger program, which helps low income households afford groceries through monthly benefits, often referred to as food stamps. Now, currently, we are 37 days into a government shutdown, which unfortunately shuts down the federal resources such as SNAP. Now, the con is that over 41 million Americans will not receive food assistance from their government. However, what I've been experiencing on the service side is local community centers, restaurants, small businesses, and even neighbors open up their pantry and their wallets to help SNAP recipients. So, while it is a sad moment in American history, I have not seen this level of collective impact regarding food insecurity in quite some time, and it does restore a little bit of my hope in humanity during such times. Now, that is what's going to lead me actually to the next part of this podcast, which is giving a small business spotlight to an organization that is having a huge impact in Seattle, Washington. And that organization being the Mojito Community Foundation. Now, while this organization is less than about 7 months old, they have been doing this work consistently for 3 to 4 years. And what that work consists of is creating up to 1,000 to 2,000 chef fresh prepared meals to deliver to the local university food bank. Because their whole premise is you don't just want to give food to food banks such as canned goods or loaves of bread, but you want to really ensure that there is this conversation around food dignity. That as you are getting your essentials, you can also deserve a bread and mojito, or you can get some fish or some shrimp, or get a meal that really tastes like it was made with love. And so that's what Mojito does. Not only is it a Latin restaurant located in North Seattle, but they also have their sister partnership, which is the Mojito Community Foundation. So, anyways, I love them. They're amazing. Luam is amazing, and Luam is the owner and has been there for the past 25 years. So, if you're the one to talk about integrity, talk about that man. But anywho, let's transition back into today's episode. But before we talk about the sociology of SNAP, we are going to briefly talk about the history of it. So, SNAP/food stamps is one of the most important safety nets here in American history. It's a program, again, built to uphold the American Constitution, and that being the general welfare of its people and ensuring that folks are fed. Now, SNAP is the largest nutritional assistance program under the U.S. Department of Agriculture, also known as the USDA. This is designed to reduce hunger and improve access to healthy food for low income Americans. Now, today, SNAP serves millions of people each month through electronic benefit transfer cards, also known as EBT, which is like a modern replacement for the old paper food stamps. Now, SNAP roots trace back to 1939 during the Great Depression. The government was facing a paradox: food surpluses and mass unemployment. The first food stamp program was launched to connect these dots, and it allowed people on public assistance to buy quote unquote orange stamps for food. And for every dollar spent, they received a bonus quote unquote blue stamp for surplus food. Now, the program fed around 4 million people a month when it was at its peak, but it ended in 1943 as the economy recovered during World War II. Then, 2 decades later, hunger was still a national issue. During his 1960 campaign, John F. Kennedy promised to revive food assistance, and he did. The modern food stamp program took shape in the early 1960s and was made permanent by Lyndon Johnson's War on Poverty in 1964. Now, fast forward just a little bit, by the early 1970s, participation had exploded from 500,000 to 10 million people. Now, we are going to be in the late 1970s. And at this point in time, there have been major changes to the program. Not only did it become nationwide with uniform eligibility standards, but the Food Stamp Act of 1977 eliminated the quote unquote purchase requirement, meaning that participants no longer had to buy their stamps. And that was a move that honestly increased participation like no one's business. The 1980s and 1990s brought about severe budget cuts and political debates. Lawmakers were worried about the cost and the dependency of the program. So in 1996, the Welfare Reform Act tightened eligibility, it cut benefits for some immigrants, and limited access for adults without dependents. But it also modernized the program. The paper food stamps were replaced with EBT cards, which made the system more efficient and a little less stigmatizing. But then came the Great Recession, and SNAP became a lifeline once again. During the 2008 recession, SNAP participation skyrocketed as families struggled economically. The 2009 Recovery Act boosted benefits temporarily to stimulate the economy, reflecting SNAP's role as an automatic stabilizer, expanding when the economy faltered and contracting when conditions improved. Now, today, SNAP remains not only just an anti hunger program, but a social indicator of economic inequality, food insecurity, and government response to poverty. So, again, while debates continue over benefit adequacy, work requirements, and food choice, SNAP continues to reflect broader sociological themes of stigma, social policy, and economic justice. Now, that being said, let's dive into the sociology of SNAP. Now, when I say the sociology of something, I mean studying that thing as a social phenomenon, not just as an individual behavior, a policy, or an event, but as something shaped by and shaping society as a whole. Now, there are four primary ways that hunger persists in the United States. First would be geographical location, whether that be lack of transit, it being a safe place, or there being good schools. All those factors make it harder for some families to get the food they need. For example, a 2022 study in public health nutrition found that residents who felt unsafe walking at night were twice as likely to experience food insecurity. Next, we have income. Low pay, job loss, or disability can make it hard for working families to afford enough food. According to the USDA's 2023 Food Security Report, nearly 12.8% of US households were food insecure. And that actually went up from 10.2% in 2021. Next, we have the high cost of living. I'm talking rent, healthcare, utilities, and childcare reduce the money available for food, especially high quality food. The Urban Institute's annual SNAP meal gap report shows that in places with higher meal costs, the SNAP benefit gap is also larger. A great city, for an example, would be Seattle, Washington. Let me tell you, I think pulling this one out my bum, but I believe that the cost of food in Seattle is 28% more than the national average when it comes to just cost of food. So I would double check that, but definitely is in the late 20s. Anywho, next we have is general social barriers. So food insecurity reflects intersectionality, overlapping systems of inequality such as race, class, gender, and disability. For example, historical redlining, zoning policies have created food apartheid and even the racialization of hunger, where people of color experience discrimination in grocery stores. And now all of this can create cycles of poverty and hunger that is hard to escape. Now, going back to the sociology of SNAP, SNAP operates as a social mirror, revealing how moral judgments about poverty are embedded in policy design, implementation, and public discourse. For example, Rebecca Blank's study, which was called The Moral Underpinnings of SNAP Policy, Work Requirements, and Deservingness, found flaws in how the government determines poverty. Politicians often frame recipients as hardworking Americans versus welfare cheats. Policies like ABAWD, also known as the Able Bodied Adults Without Dependents, for example, only provides benefits for 3 months in a 36-month period, assuming that hunger is acceptable for people who choose not to work, while ignoring structural barriers like low wages, limited job availability, and regional economic conditions. This again shows how cultural values about work and poverty are encoded into law. Now, SNAP also reflects inequality. For example, race. While white individuals make up the majority of recipients of SNAP, Black, Hispanic, and Indigenous households are more likely to need SNAP due to historical and structural barriers. Next, for example, we have gender. Single mothers are among the most common recipients, reflecting the gender pay gap and unequal caregiving burdens. Now, finally, from a sociological perspective, SNAP can be seen as more than just a welfare program. It subtly does regulate our behavior and does operate as a tool of social control. Recipients have to follow certain rules, whether that be income limitations, work requirements, and restrictions on purchases, which shape behavior and encourages compliance. The program does keep poverty manageable within the system, offering support while also reinforcing social hierarchies. So, with all that being said, let's just take a quick breather. Again, we started off discussing the history of SNAP, how it was formed, then we briefly unpacked various ways that hunger persists in the United States, and then we just sprinkled some sociology into the conversation to unpack how SNAP, as a social institution, reflects not only various systems of inequality within the United States, but how the program reflects our core values as a nation and how it can also impact people's day-to-day social behavior. So, with all of this information, how do we apply it to our daily life? Because I falsely assume that if you're listening to this podcast, you have a desire to serve your community. So, here are some specimen solutions on how to do just that. First and foremost, we have invest into your local food banks and pantries, not just with financial donations, but with your service and ability to volunteer. Second is identify restaurants that partner with affordable food distributors or food rescue programs. Again, make that date night super meaningful. Third is check your biases and make retail spaces more welcoming. Earlier, I spoke about the racialization of hunger, which means that when people of color are shopping, they're more inclined to be followed, to be targeted, or to be sold overpriced food. So, again, if you're not a person of color or you don't work in a grocery store, just be a mindful neighbor, keep an eye out, and if something is going down, just be sensitive and proactive. Next, we have is invest in schools, community safety, and neighborhood affordability. As I mentioned earlier, safety matters, and there is a direct correlation between a person's ability to be food secure and the safety of their neighborhood. Next on our lovely little list is vote. Vote, 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 vote. I know it may not help with the day-to-day operations of putting food directly on people's table, but long term, you can help restore and expand benefits for future generations. Next is leverage your workplace. If your company participates in food rescue programs or employee matching or volunteer programs, just do some research, contact HR, see what's going on with the benefits package, like be intentional with your workplace. Next, speaking of work, you can totally use your skills professionally. Like when I think about it, many food banks, mutual aid groups, or even school programs need skills in IT, logistics, marketing, legal support, or even accounting. So if you offer an hour a month remotely, that can help people operationally. And last but not least, support SNAP. SNAP is not just a social safety network, it's also a form of economic stimulus. By putting money directly into the hands of people who will spend it immediately, it boosts local economies, creates jobs, and stabilizes demands, especially during recessions. Now, here's the best part. You do not need to do all of these steps. Just identify one that empowers you to serve your community in the greatest capacity. Because again, when everyone does their part, there should be no social problem, especially food insecurity. So, on that note, thank you for tuning in to learn more about the sociology of SNAP. And again, as a cheeky refresher, we learned the history of SNAP. We discussed how it was formed. We unpacked how hunger persists in the United States. And then we sprinkled some sociology in the conversation to unpack SNAP as a social institution, reflecting on various systems of inequality here in the US and how the program reflects our core values as a nation and how it can impact people's social behavior moving forward. So, with that being said, go out, volunteer, vote, share this podcast with a friend of a friend, or a friend of a friend, and make sure to check out the Mojito Community Foundation Fund. I also have the privilege to serve on their media development team. So, if you have any comments, questions, concerns, feel free to DM me on Instagram at Specimen the Sociologist, and I will gladly respond back to you. And until then, go and have a powerful day.